Are you a real musician if you don't earn money from it? I've wanted to be a rock star since I was 6 years old, and it didn't quite turn out how I imagined. And the truth is, making money from music is turbulent, even now when there are more paths than ever before. And I'm not convinced it's the dream. I think the so-called weekend warrior might be the healthiest kind of musician. You keep the love, you keep the joy. You lose time to music without it becoming your day job. You get all the good parts, and of course, a hint of the bad parts, but without the constant pressure. This episode is a conversation between me and my friend Scott Bonneau about exactly that. The full version is over on Nebula. Oh, but hi, my name is Mary Spender, and welcome to Tuesday Talks. Tuesday Talks. Firstly, why don't you, can you introduce yourself to the audience? Some people might know you on my Patreon page because of interactions over there with people. But yeah, introduce yourself and tell me why you're here.
Yeah, so my name is Scott Bonneau. I am a musician. I live just outside Austin, Texas. However, I am not a full-time musician. I am a weekend warrior, as they say. So I play in several bands around town these days. In a band called Black Days, which is a 90s Seattle sound kind of tribute. I'm in a band called Crystal Visions, which is a Fleetwood Mac tribute. And I have varyingly played in original and cover bands over the last 35 years or so. So I've been a musician for the bulk of my life. By day, I work in the tech industry, and I've been fortunate enough to build this studio, which is where I'm sitting right now, which is kind of what I want to make be my second act. But today, my work as a musician is primarily in off hours, so nights and weekends and that type of stuff. But it does take up a significant amount of my time, and it's one of the things that I'm the most passionate about.
We have actually already collaborated on the YouTube channel.
Yep.
You helped me produce a cover version of Basket Case by Green Day.
Yep.
That is actually one of my mother's favorite videos. And we obviously did it remotely, and actually we've never met in person.
That's right.
But, I've got a long overdue trip to Austin, especially to see this studio.
Yes,
okay.
One day for sure.
So to kick off under the umbrella of sort of like the identity of musician, and you actually choosing the identity of weekend warrior, I have a statement. I don't necessarily agree with this. I definitely don't agree with this. But the statement is, you're only a real musician if music is how you make your living.
Yes.
True or false?
I think categorically false. In my opinion, anyway. It's interesting. One of the things that you said in a video a long time ago, before you and I had first been introduced, has stuck with me, and that is you are a musician if you make music. And I think it was in the context of a video where you were talking about overcoming imposter syndrome or something along those lines. And that is something that has always stuck with me. And I think it's really valuable for people to think and believe that, because I think that if you are chasing after some definition of the word musician that involves some externality, like someone else deciding to pay you money to do it, you're going to be focused on the wrong things. I think that the act of making music is what makes you a musician. You don't even have to be good, in my opinion. I think you just have to love it and do it and work at it and want to get better at it. I think those are the things that kind of define what musicianship is for me. But I am also curious, you said you don't necessarily agree with the statement. I'm curious what your take on it is.
I mean, yeah, my biggest pet peeve when I meet other musicians who don't necessarily earn an income from it, is this sort of like quality aspect where they're judging themselves and they're like, oh, well, I wouldn't call myself that. And I fully understand when it's like, okay, if you're a medical student, you can't call yourself yet a doctor. But music is an art form, and I feel like maybe just in terms of my lifespan, I began playing music when I was 6 years old, and I wasn't even worried about how it was seen. I was just playing music, and then I was a musician. And there was absolutely no conversation in my mind that I was not earning money at 6 years old. I wasn't earning money at 16 years old. But I'd been playing music for 10 years by that point, and I was most certainly a musician. So yeah, I feel, maybe it's the sort of, I don't even know if anyone else is actually saying this statement.
Yeah.
It's something we're telling ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting component to this. I think a lot of it is, as you said, right, we're not talking about being a professional engineer. We're not talking about being a doctor or a pilot. We're talking about a way that you view yourself and the way that you express yourself. And, if you express yourself by singing in the shower or by learning how to play Rachmaninoff on the piano, you're a musician in case one, and you're a musician in case two. I think it's more how you define yourself than someone else gatekeeping or determining that you are or can or can't be a musician.
Well, I guess what people they're probably asking themselves this question that I've prepared earlier. How do you introduce yourself when music isn't the headline? So if I get to sort of mold myself depending on the conversation. When people are like, what do you do? And I don't know them, and they haven't seen any of the YouTube stuff, which is the majority of people. I usually might say I'm a musician, or I might say, oh, I run a media business, depending on how much discussion, because people do immediately assume that you can't make money from music. So therefore, when they're like, wait, so you make a living from that? And I'm like, oh, well, kind of. And it's just a conversation that sometimes I'm just, maybe I don't have the energy for. But to be in the tech industry, as you are, but with this hobby that is so much more than a hobby, it's a vocation, which I feel like applies to probably everyone watching this. I guess it's hard. So how do you describe to your friends or your colleagues about what you're getting up to in your evenings and weekends? Because I bet sometimes you probably get carried away in that new studio of yours, and there are probably bags under your eyes the next day when you're at the office, just like it was for me working 9 to 5 in my little admin operations finance jobs. So
I think it's funny because what you're talking about. I have a little thing that I do allow myself to do occasionally, which is I'd always have described myself as a musician. I think it's kind of just how I view myself. But there are circumstances where I have referred to myself as a professional musician, and I think that's kind of, that word is doing a little bit of heavy lifting. I don't make music to make a living, but at the same time, people have repeatedly over the last 20 plus years paid me to play music, and I think that's the definition of being a professional. So I occasionally call myself a professional musician. But it's funny when you talk about how do I explain myself to other people. I tell people all the time, I'm a musician. I have in my office where I work remotely, I have guitars and stuff that are visible in the background. Big believer in always having a guitar within arm's reach. It's become part of my world since COVID. But people say, oh, do you play in a band? Do you play guitar? And I say, yeah, I do. But then they'll say, oh, can I hear some of your stuff? And I send them a link to stuff that's up on YouTube or videos of my bands. We publish them after live shows and the like. And then when they see that, they go, oh, you're like a real musician, and it's like, okay, like you don't just duff around in your office or your bedroom. Like, this is like a real thing. And it's like, that's when it sort of leads into more, I think, interesting conversations. Well, how does that work? What do you do? How do you pick the songs? All those various things. And I do think there is some it raises another level of interest when people realize that it's like, it's not, at least for someone like me, it's not just a thing I do occasionally. It's like, no, like this is as integral a part of my life as my job is. Not in the same way. It doesn't put food on the table or anything like that, but I have, as much energy and drive for doing my work in music, despite the fact that it isn't a full-time career for me, as I do, for my day job. And that's interesting. And I think, as I've gotten older, I think, I think it becomes a topic of conversation for other folks that are my age, folks with kids, especially when your kids are younger, not, you don't have 2 seconds to think for yourself, let alone the ability to, go to 3-hour practices and drive an hour to play an hour show and drive an hour back and all that kind of stuff. So it becomes an interesting conversation about things like work-life balance and how do you find the time. And I find it to be a very interesting, conversation starter. And it's something that I will speak endlessly about.
It's not too dissimilar from my experience as well, with people being like, "Oh my God, okay, you're a real musician" as well. When I'm like, "Oh, do you have songs on Spotify?" Yes. Do you make YouTube videos? Oh yeah, no, yeah, I have a YouTube channel. The thing that sort of strikes me is simply a musician of any kind. Who is actually trying, becoming a professional musician, they have lanes of income anyway, streams of income. Because before YouTube, I was doing the cover sets, which we'll get onto with your cover bands. I was teaching. I was running a music school on a Wednesday evening, which was essentially an admin job. And I was doing all these like little bits, and then I'd do a temp job on the side as well. And I sort of want to encourage people to almost, I don't want to discourage, I'm not going to discourage people from going full time as a musician, but you can't just be a musician nowadays anyway. So if you can have this other stream of income that, might take up 40, 50 hours of your week, which, we only have 168 hours. It's a stability that actually might encourage your best work. And it provides a friction and limitation that makes you wrestle and like remain hungry to be a better musician or to finish a project, or spend time tinkering away on something that you're just like, oh my God, I can't get this out of my head. So this next statement is, being a weekend warrior is just a polite way of saying you gave up. And obviously, it's just, music is a lifelong pursuit.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think there is maybe some way, if you wanted to expand the definition of the phrase to give up, like maybe there's a way like that. Like, I mean, when I was 16, I thought for sure I was going to be a rock star. There was just no doubt about it in my brain. And obviously that isn't what happened. Did I give up on the dream? No. I mean, 16-year-old me would be, thrilled to be sitting in this space that I'm in now, which is a privilege to have, but unlikely something that would have come about if that was the direction that I had pursued with my sort of full-time energy. But on the flip side, I think there is something very real about, you talked about limitation. I actually think limitation is one of the critical components to doing anything creatively. When you have no limitations, at least for somebody like me, the way that my brain works, I go into analysis paralysis mode. If there isn't some constraint, whether it's time or money or access to resources or whatever, I'll never get anything done. But if I have something that needs to be done in a window of time, like we've got a show coming up and I have to learn these 3 songs or whatever else it is, you can bet your bottom dollar that I will find the time and make the put in the effort in order to make that happen. But if I didn't have that constraint, I don't think it would happen quite the same way. So I've had to work over the years to, learn how to hack my own brain chemistry to, when there isn't an external deadline, I create one for myself. And I've discovered over the years that an artificial constraint works just as well for my brain as a real constraint does. And so I've kind of had to work, on building systems like that to make sure that I can get things done. But I think, there's no way that I think, what I do now at 48 years old is in any way, I don't think it is in any way a sign of giving up. I think it's a sign of finding ways to continue to make it happen, despite everything else that happens to be going on, around you.
Well, I fully agree with the limitations and setting yourself a deadline. Intrinsic, extrinsic, it is the same thing, providing you have to sort of show up for yourself with the intrinsic.
That's right.
Deadlines, and you have to, I think the insecurities with people being like, oh, I'm not a musician, it is them honoring maybe their own dreams. So you honor what you dreamt of doing when you were 16. I would say even, maybe in my last 6 months or so, the last 6 months of 2025, I probably haven't quite honored my 15-year-old self, because I changed up my business, and then I tried to change up my video style just to, refresh things essentially and get my sort of creative juices flowing. But I didn't give myself enough deadlines, and I just didn't create as heavily as I was doing. And I do feel like, I think removing the money aspect of all of it, that where you're spending your time and where you're giving it attention, or giving this thing attention that happens to be music, that's all we really want. Like, money is, we all have to earn it, but really it's just how you're spending your time. And so people think, oh, if I'm earning money from it, therefore I'm spending those 40 hours that, instead of being in this job that maybe they don't like, or maybe they do like, they would have 40 hours to spend on music, which I actually just, I wonder whether it'd actually be the case.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember reading something somewhere a few years ago. It was a person who was an author, and they were talking about how when they were writing their first book, they had a day job, and they were working during the day and then getting home and sort of writing all night. And when the book got close, they said, I'm going to go take 6 months off, and I'm going to go finish this book. And when that process started for them, they said the first couple of months they didn't write anything. When they didn't have that constraint of like, I only have so many hours in the day to do this, they lost all of their sort of creative juice. And I thought that was really interesting. And it's something that I've definitely felt, on my side as well. When I create some time for myself to be in the studio or to work on projects with my bands or whatever, I have a surprising amount of difficulty getting started. And once I get started, I things get rolling, and that's just the way that I happen to work. All of the difficulty for me is in the activation energy part of the process. Once it gets up and running, it kind of gets to be self-sustaining. But I do think it's interesting that people from various creative disciplines have this same kind of experience, where when there's nothing else that you have to do, it can be very difficult for you to decide, I'm going to go spend my time on this. And I will say for the type of stuff that I do, my bands play probably 25 shows a year, usually 60 to 90 minutes. And at any point in time, we're working on new songs, or dusting off old songs, or working on, putting together a tight show and building a set that has good flow through it, and those kinds of things. And when we are in the absolute run up to some of those bigger deadlines is when I am by far my most productive. And honestly, when I feel the most energy from it, as well. So I think there's some value in putting yourself in situations where where stuff just has to get done. And I think if it's something that you care about, you find ways to make that happen. And I've certainly been fortunate enough to find myself in those kind of situations where it's like, oh yeah, I have to go get these things done. And then the last thing I'll say on that is just one of the other things that I think is really beautiful about that is when you're doing it with other people, when you're doing it as a part of a band, one of the biggest motivating factors for me is like, I don't want to be the one that screws this up. I'm like having to be accountable to performing well, to knowing your parts, to showing up, to performing well, all those kinds of things is about, elevating the experience for the other people in your band and elevating the experience for the people who are hearing you play. And that's just something that I find to be, super energizing and super motivating.
When you finish a long day at work and still choose to get yourself in the studio or to a rehearsal room, is it because in the studio you're alone mostly?
Yeah.
But rehearsals, obviously, there are other people showing up. Do you find it easier just to go to rehearsals rather than the studio, or do you have any sort of like what's pulling you there?
Yeah, it's definitely easier to go to rehearsal. Although I will say there are definitely days, even though I always love it, there are days when I'm like, oh, I have to go to rehearsal tonight just because it's an hour drive away from my house or whatever else it is. And there are days when I have to get up the motivation to get in the car and go. There's never any doubt that I'm going to do that, but there are days when I'm, on the precipice of it where I don't want to do it. But I do find that because other people are going to be there, and because there's a show coming up, or because we're getting ready to do this recording project, which is what I'm preparing for this week, that I go, versus the studio, which is like 30 meters from my house. There are days when I'm like, I should go over to the studio today, and I never walk the 30 meters. And I think that is because there isn't someone who is going to be disappointed in me if I don't walk over here, apart from myself. So having that externality, having that accountability of other people that are counting on you, I find to be a very useful factor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I felt the same. Just throughout all the music that I was learning how to do, school, university, then bands afterwards, or a tour looming or whatever. As soon as there are other people, then I'm showing up. There's absolutely no doubt about it. But yeah, this sort of like contract you have with yourself that you have all the gear that you now dreamed of having, and everything has become so much more accessible than we ever imagined when we were growing up. And sometimes I still choose not to use it all. And it sort of horrifies myself. And that's why in 2026, I'm like, okay, I am setting myself deadlines. And this is all about the relationship I have with myself about showing up rather than with someone. And I need to have, and I guess it's the same sort of thing that I'm telling myself about going to the gym. I'm like, I need to have maybe a little bit more self-respect to actually go to this place that I actually really enjoy going to. And, I'm not there trying to become a professional athlete at all. It's just simply something that we as humans must do. And I feel there's the same thing with music. I feel I don't quite know what's going on with people thinking that music is optional. I think it's so cathartic, and I think it would brighten people's day whether they actively listened to music, whether they actually picked up that instrument that they put down or has gathered dust, and to not worry about being 10,000 hours in the future or being a professional, but instead just being like, oh, you know what, actually, if I pick up this instrument today or I get myself to the studio, 5 minutes in, I will be 5 minutes better than I was 5 minutes ago. Whereas when you go to the gym, you don't see results for weeks. You could never see results in the gym. But I think with something like a musical instrument, you actually you can see results a lot quicker and you can have a night's sleep, and then the next day you can play that thing that you couldn't play today, but just providing you turn up.
Yeah, it's funny. I think along those same lines, one of the things that I think a lot about, and I'm on, the guitar talk side of TikTok and that type of stuff. And so a fair few people on my For You page are like beginning guitar players, for example, that are asking for, advice on how do you do a bar chord? I'm trying to do an F and I can't for the life of me do it without, buzzing. Or what does your practice routine look like? Should I start with scales or songs or what have you? And the most consistently good advice that I've seen, and whenever someone asks my take on this, is do you have a song that you like that you want to learn how to play? Like, just focus on that. Like, if you got a song and it's 3.5 minutes long, in 3.5 minutes you can play that song. You might play it poorly, you might not know all the chord changes or whatever, but you can go front to back on it in 3.5 minutes. And to your point about like the gym, yeah, 3.5 minutes isn't going to show results in the gym in the same way. But if you play that same song 10 times over, 30, 40 minutes, you're going to build up that repetition. And you're going to build the muscle memory. You're going to learn in a way that you'll be able to see the progression and the difference of. And then critically for me is, if that's a song that you love and you wanted to play it for a reason, when you get to that point where that first song that you really wanted to learn how to play, you can play it well. You're going to feel great about yourself when it's done, which is just like, that's awesome in and of itself. But secondly, you're going to want to have that feeling again. So then what's the next song that you want to learn? And that's how it snowballs, right? And I think that getting back to this notion of like, are you a musician, or like, are you a musician if you don't know theory? Like, another interesting question. Do you have to know your modes? Do you have to be able to tell me what are all the notes in the harmonic minor scale, or to be a real musician? Like, I would say strongly no. Dave Grohl famously doesn't know what the chords are to most of his songs. He's still a hell of a guitar player. It doesn't matter. Eddie Van Halen famously never knew theory. Undoubtedly one of the best guitar players in history. But it really is, if you play that song and you love it and you have another song you want to play, you will learn to go do that. You will decide to put the time and energy in because you know what the output is going to be. It's going to make you feel good. You're going to have this thing that you can do now. And anything that keeps you going back for more, whatever it is that drives you, that's the thing that you should lean into. You'll ultimately land wherever you want to land if you follow that thing that continually excites you and gives you energy.
I hope you're enjoying the conversation so far. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the full version exists over on Nebula. Here's the reason why. Nebula is becoming a prestige home for originals, extended cuts, and thoughtful storytelling from hundreds of creators. Everything's ad-free, early access, and beautifully easy to watch. And because Nebula is creator-run, when you watch there, you're directly supporting the people who make the shows, not a giant middleman. And now, there's a new perk. Every new Nebula account gets a 3-day free trial, no payment info required. You can watch anything, including my documentaries. So if you want to watch the making of Songbook, the Dire Straits story, Led Zeppelin, and a ton of incredible Nebula originals, hit the link below, scan the QR code, and start watching now. Okay, thank you for watching, and as always, I'll be seeing you here again very, very soon.